Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookishrealm. I'm so sorry for my voice. I think my allergies are doing their thing again. Allergy season be kicking my ass from here to kingdom come and does not care anything about how I feel. So as you can tell from the title of this video, we are here to do another wrap up. Y'all are gonna be sick of me, but I promise you after this one, I'm setting the tone by uploading this on a Sunday because I want to get back to my weekly vlogs in the second quarter of the year. I struggled the first quarter because I just have had a lot going on until you've gotten like these big chunks of wrap-ups from me, and I don't want to do that anymore because it's just so much editing on my end. It takes forever, which is why I wanted to do the weekly vlogs in the first place, because doing a mid-month and a final wrap-up just doesn't work for me anymore. It's not in my best interest. So we do have another like 25 books to wrap up, but the caveat with this is that I don't review the graphic novels or the comic books on my channel. So that's a plus. I just briefly mentioned them. And then on top of that, this week also include, well, this week's log. Getting so tongue-tied here. This week's log also includes books from the Trans Rights Readathon. So actually I have already done a complete wrap-up and reading vlog for the Trans Rights Readathon, so I won't be discussing those books either. So preferably this will be a shorter wrap-up, but we know how I can get long-winded. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to mention the graphic novels and comics and manga that I may have ended up reading for the last half of March, which I am, when this goes up the day after, I plan on doing a live show quarter one wrap up of all the things that I have read, comics, graphic novels, and manga related. So let's see here. The first graphic novel, manga, or comic that I have is Boys Run the Riot, Volume 1. Then I have Narwhal, Volume 1, which was so cute. I understand now why kids like this one, or the series. I have Sunny the Shark, which is one of the books in the kind of like this Into the Wild type series where our author is focusing on different animals in the wild and how what humans do environmentally impacts these animals. It's been a great series so far. I only have one in the series left and then I'll be finished with it. I also ended up reading Stargazing, which was absolutely beautiful, another middle grade graphic novel. I read Squished. This is the third Megan Lloyd Wagner book that I have read, graphic novel. I also read Super Pancake, which is more of a children's, well, no, it's middle grade. It kind of suits both, but Squished is her pairing up with the original illustrator on Allergic. I read X Gender for the Trans Rights Readathon. I read The Prince and the Dressmaker for the Trans Rights Readathon. I also finished the Magic Treehouse graphic novel, which is a literally like they're I want to say translating, but they are actually taking all of the Magic Treehouse books and turning them into graphic novels. Now, I don't know if they're going to do all of them like that, but I did read the first one because I've read the first two in the series, so I read the first one. And then I also ended up finally finishing Unfamiliar, which took me so long to get through because I didn't finish it before my hold was up, and then I had to wait like 6 weeks before I could get a copy of it again. So those are all the comics and graphic novels that I've read since the last time that we've talked. Now, the books that I read for the Trans Rights Readathon that I'm not going to discuss include The Empress of Salt and Fortune, Coffee Boy, and Obi is Man Enough. So those are three that I will not be discussing because I did cover them in my wrap up. So if you want to check that out, like I said, it'll be in the card symbol above. So now we're going to dive into the books that I actually did end up finishing outside of the Trans Rights Readathon and those that are not graphic novels, comics, or manga. I am going to be looking down because I do have my notations here of my thoughts for each book. But the first one that we're going to be talking about is You Are Here by Ellen O, or it's You Are Here Connecting Flights by Ellen O. I have seen Ellen O around for a while, of course, working in the library, but I've never picked up any of her books. and she works for We Need Diverse Books. I think she's one of the most recognizable names that comes out of it, if she's not the founder of it. I can't exactly remember, but this is the first time that I'm reading her, and technically she was just the editor on this one. So You Are Here Connecting Flights is it's kind of like a short story compilation, except the short stories are actually interconnected with each other. These all take place at a Chicago airport. It's written by 12 Asian authors, and these stories detail the Asian American experience. Now, this has content warnings for racism, discrimination, and racial slurs. It is a direct response to Ellen O's other work, which was Flying Lessons. Someone had wrote in and said that they really enjoyed the book, but they were saddened to see that the only East Asian representation that was in the book took place in Asia. And so while everyone else got these kind of like American stories, like what it's like to exist in two worlds, their Asian representation within the framework of that story did not get that opportunity. So the goal in creating this book was to make sure that they were providing representation for Asian Americans, particularly those that have backgrounds in Southeast and East Asia. So it, like I said, it follows 12, not two, definitely not two. It follows 12 connecting stories that all take place in a Chicago airport. And I think the first thing that I like to point out is that none of these stories are easy to read, because most of them in some capacity or shape or form are addressing racial discrimination or racial slurs, or overhearing it, and sometimes in some of these cases intervening. I immediately appreciated that because of the variety of stories that we got, we were getting the message that while all of these characters are Asian Americans, no two Asian Americans are going to have the exact same experience. There may be things that they have in common, but in terms of everything being exactly the same, that's not going to be true, which is once again that whole idea that no community is ever a monolith. There was great diversity in the characters, meaning that in their challenges and joys. So a lot of these stories not only addressed racism, but that feeling of being caught in between two worlds. There were some stories about adoption. There was a story about a neurodivergent father and son, which I really loved. There were stories about poverty, immigration, but also stories about just joy and courage and inner strength, and finding and appreciating those familial dynamics and honoring friendships and just the beauty in being who you are. So it was a really good balance between, you know, pain and joy, which I always like to see in books that are tackling tough topics like racism, especially in a middle grade audience, that there is that hint of joy and uplifting. That way we're giving our, you know, younger readers some form of a balance. I think I, as a reader, definitely had a great time kind of piecing the parts of the story together, trying to figure out like how all these characters were interconnected and where they were like seeing each other, because it'd be fun where you would read one story, then you dive into the next story, and then they would mention somebody else in the story, and then just figuring out how they all ended up being connected when it was all said and done. It was perfect. I think that Ellen O, in terms of editing, this was a great project that she worked on. I think that it was brilliant that she did include elements of the pandemic in this to illustrate the correlation between the pandemic and the rise of anti-Asian hate. So it was very prevalent, or very prominent within the text. This is one of those books that I say fulfills what Dr. Bishop, if you didn't know, Dr. Bishop is an amazing human that came up with the concept of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. This is an example of kids having those mirrors where they're able to walk through a library shelf and see their experience represented in the framework of a book. But I also think that it's a good representation of those windows where readers get the opportunity to learn more about the Asian American experience and how people may feel being Asian American. It was well written, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It's a quick read, by the way, but it's definitely well worth a read. So the next one that I have, I should have mentioned that I've also been trying to read as much as I could for middle grade March. It didn't end up making my 30 and 31, but that's perfectly fine. I ended up reading, I think, somewhere in between like maybe 27 to 28 middle grade books in March, so that I'm not disappointed by that. But the next one that I ended up reading was Legends of the Lotus Island. That's the name of the series, but this specific book in the series is called The Guardian Test, and this is by Christina Soontornvat. And I've heard so much about her work, and I have never read anything by her before. So reading this, I completely understood why people love it so much. I will say that this skews a little bit on the younger side of middle grade, which is great because a lot of middle grade that I see is typically for ages 10 and up. And so it's nice to dive into a middle grade where they're not leaving out that younger group, which is about like 8 and 9-ish. Those 8 and 9-year-olds often get left out a lot when it comes to middle grade, especially when it comes to middle grade fantasy, because they're usually thicker and require a little bit more in terms of reading experience. But this one I definitely say is perfect for those younger middle grade kids that love fantasy but are not ready to pick up a complete tome. So I would say ages 8 to 9. So The Guardian Test is, like I said, the first in a series. It focuses on a main character by the name of Plum, and Plum gets into this elite training academy when her grandfather pretty much applies on her behalf. So when she gets to this academy, all of the students are training to be able to shift into their guardian forms, which are beings that are supposed to protect the natural environment. And while Plum is there, she pretty much goes through a whole series of ups and downs. So one of the interesting things about this is that it contains some of the most typical elements that you will see in any middle grade fantasy book. But what Christina does is she introduces a light conversation about classism. She doesn't do a deep dive, but Plum comes from a less wealthy background. They're farmers, and she really gets picked on and bullied for that whenever she goes to the school. But what's interesting is that through her interactions with other characters, she pretty much learns that having money does not equate to having happiness, which I think is extremely important. There's also this slight dive into land ownership and talking about the natural environment, kind of along the lines of environmentalism. And I think that we're going to see that in terms of conflict with another group. It's just kind of touched on in this one because this is definitely a series opener. We're just getting introduced to the characters and the beginning of the world. And so I'm excited to see how that's going to play out in our next installment, which actually does come out fall, I believe, of this year. So it's not long, it's not a difficult read, but I think that if you have a younger reader that's into fantasy, this is one that they probably would end up enjoying, because as an adult reader, I really enjoyed it. Ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next one that I ended up reading was Like a Hurricane. This is another middle grade book that I ended up giving 4.5 stars, and it is one of the most difficult books that I'm probably going to review, because I'm not sure how to describe it, because it was pretty much an experience. This book was originally written in French and was recently translated to English. It is about a young boy who knows that he's gay but is struggling with how to communicate his identity to his parents. And so it's almost like it's told in free verse, but I don't want to just simplify it as free verse, because even when I went into it, I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a coming out story simply written in free verse, but it's definitely more than that, because it's an artistic, I don't know, because it probably is going to sound redundant for me to say like it's an artistic form of poetry, but the way that it's written is that the words actually bring, the way that the words are written, let me put it this way, the way that the words are written actually brings the text to life and literally gives it movement. You have to read this one to really understand where I'm coming from, but it was absolutely beautiful. I really found this one to be amazing. It was mind-blowingly beautiful. It follows this main character as he describes his coming out experience like a hurricane. So the confusion, the turmoil, the chaos that comes with a hurricane is really identical to his personal feelings about having to share this huge secret with his family. And not only with his family, but also reckoning or coming to terms with the fact that he is possibly going to lose friendships. He's detailing losing a friendship, someone that he's known since he's been a kid, but unfortunately he finds that he's, growing feelings for this person, and he knows that the relationship will never ever be the same because this friend doesn't feel the same way. And so I think that so many LGBTQ plus youth are going to be able to relate to the emotional aspects of this. I think that the way that it was written, how it was structured, the way that the words were placed on the page makes it so different than just a middle grade book written in verse about coming out. Like, it was absolutely beautiful, gut-wrenchingly beautiful. I cannot recommend this enough. This is not a very well-known book, but I think that if you ever get the chance to read it, you definitely should. Okay, so after that, I decided to deep dive. I told you I was going to do this, deep diving into my children's lit. So not middle grade, but also children's lit, which includes picking up easy readers or transitional readers, where we have younger kids who are becoming more accustomed to reading on their own. And so Scholastic has a company, which I talked about, I think, in one of my book release videos. Scholastic has kind of I think it feels like an imprint of sorts that's called Branches. And these books are really focused on kids that are in like kindergarten up to second grade, so about 5 to 7. And it gives them the opportunity to read independently, but in a way that works best for them. So it's not necessarily a leveled reader, but it's kind of like one step beyond a level reader, kind of, sort of. That's kind of how I perceive it to be. I could be completely wrong, but I would recommend a book like this for ages 5 to 7. So this is Layla and the Bots is the series, and the first one that I ended up reading was Happy Paws. This kind of has also graphic novel-like elements to it, told in full color. It focuses on Layla and her robots, and they go to visit this local theme park that no longer is functioning or running because they have low attendance. And so they navigate the community and try to figure out, well, what is making people no longer want to come here, and is closely linked back to people's relationships with their dogs. And so Layla and her bots come up with a plan, have a whole design, and then build and go through the necessary protocol to make sure that their reimagining of this theme park is safe and fun for everyone. This is very STEM based, but as someone who's not very much so into STEM, I really did enjoy it. And I think that any kid that's not into STEM either is still going to enjoy this. And then it works very well for those kids who are really into tinkering. It gives them those foundational steps of like, this is what you do when you want to, create this project. These are the appropriate steps that you go through. It's really, really easy, like writing in terms of like the flow of the story, the artwork, but I really like the relationship that we get to see with Layla and her robots. I think it's really, really cute. I had fun reading it. It was only like 80 pages, probably took me half an hour to read, if that, and I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of the series. It was well worth it. The next one that I have is another easy reader, but for this one I put the recommendation for the ages 6 to 8 because I think that the text is a little bit more difficult than I would recommend for a 5-year-old, but it is Sophia Martinez, My Family Adventure. So this is another transitional series that have like bind ups. So some of them are like 30 to 40 pages, and then what the publisher will do is they'll make a decision. They'll be like, oh, let's just bind them all up and sell them off like that. And so that's exactly what they did with this one. So this one follows Sophia and her family through a few different scenarios, which includes like making a piñata for Abuela's birthday, Catching a Mouse, and Switching School Pictures. And I feel like it was actually the order of the actual stories was Switching the School Pictures, Make a Piñata for Abuela's Birthday, and then Catching a Mouse. And it just, they all involved her family members in some way. I think that the stories were really fun, engaging. They had vibrant illustrations. This is a little different than Layla and the Bots, which follows kind of a, like I said, a graphic novel format. This one is actual like prose text with pictures. You know how they'll put like pictures, like wrap the text around a picture, something like that, insert them here and there. That's what this was more of. So this one, like I said, definitely was a little bit heavier on the text and doesn't have the same repetitive kind of motions that Layla has, which is why I aged this one up just one step. But this is a fun read. I think that kids would love this. This is a good kind of read aloud for nighttime. If you have kids that are like fans of Junie B. Jones, I think that if you're looking for my more diverse selections than Junie B. Jones, Sophia Martinez is definitely the way to go. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Now the next one I have is in one of those I Can Read comics, which I'm always kind of like back and forth of whether I should put it here or on my channel, and I decided I was going to cover them on both because it is both a beginner reader or a leveled reader as well as a comic book. It's a way to introduce kids to comics, and so I read another one of those, which was Fish and Wave. I talked about this a little bit on my comic book channel recently because I did a recommendation video for leveled comic books for kids that are between the ages of, I believe, 5 to 7 was kind of the age range that I was looking at. But this one, it's not really much for me to say about this one. I'm not gonna lie to you. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was cute. It literally is about a fish and a wave who meet and become friends. And literally there were 2 or 3 words on each page. So it's not really much for me to tell you, except the fish was amazed that a wave could actually like get bigger in size. But other than that, like really there's nothing else. But there are more that I believe are coming out in the series that I'm definitely interested in picking up. Now I took a little break from my children and middle grade stuff and wanted to pick up a little bit something more adult. So Monet and I ended up reading Animal together by Quan. We were having a conversation about Black romance and street lit, and I was saying how I had read Ashley Antoinette and Jaquavis before, and she was telling me a little bit about how she knows people who have read Quan, and I was familiar with Quan, but I had never read him, and I knew that one of his more popular books was Animal. And so randomly, literally randomly on a Friday night, Monet and I agreed that we would read Animal together, and we finished it like over the course of a few days because it was entertaining. So Animal is the first in a 5-book series by Quan. This is a street lit book that I do not recommend for the faint of heart, and I'm going to tell you why, because I'm about to go to the content warnings for this one, which are a lot. So there's abuse, mention of rape several times with descriptions, derogatory language towards women, drug abuse, drug addiction, gore, violence, kidnapping, murder on page, and fighting. And I promise you there are more content warnings for this that I am absolutely missing. I know that I am missing a hell of a lot of content warnings for this, but those are the ones that I could remember in detail off the top of my head. I think that at its core, the best way for me to describe Animal is that it is a revenge story. So we're following a main character by the name of Animal, and I'm going to get into, we're technically following more than one main character, but that's more what the issues that I take with the book. But we're following a character by the name of Animal who actually has appeared in one of Quan's other series, which I will get to in a second. And the love of his life, Gucci, has been shot in connection to some issues that he's had with another group in Harlem, and he's been gone. He's been overseas pretty much trying to get himself together. He's been in hiding a little bit because people have assumed that Animal's dead. Well, when he finds out that Gucci got shot and she's in the hospital in critical condition, he comes back to Harlem and he wants to make every single person who's been responsible for this, he wants them to pay for it. It's basically war. What I liked about this is pure entertainment. I read this book slow, and I thought about this book even when I wasn't reading it. And it was shocking for me because I think that even the Cartel series, which I read, was by Ashley Antoinette and Jaquavis, I can't remember it being this gory. And I could be wrong because it's been a while since I've read it. But I really, really liked it, but I can't remember it being like this graphic. And so I was very shocked that, for me, entertainment-wise, I was sucked into the story. It was extremely entertaining. And I know that there's going to be elements of the story that don't technically hold up because it was published over 10 years ago. It's published in 2012, I believe. So we're talking a 10, 11 year time difference, and when this book was first published and when I have now officially started the series. But I will say that Quan has written one of the most complex characters that I've read in a while. And the reason why I say that is because Animal is the perfect kind of like, how do I say this? He's like the perfect description or the perfect example. I was looking for the word example. He's the perfect example of what happens when you disrupt the balance between leading with your head and leading with your heart. Because there were moments when I like felt for Animal, because even as hardcore as he comes off in this book, there's a very deep emotional side to him that's very connected to Gucci. And to see her in the hospital kind of laid out, just can't really help herself at this point. And at the point that he sees her, like, she's in critical condition, and there's this guilt, I think, that he feels for not being there to protect her. And so he's emotional about it. Like, this man he cries on page. He's devastated and heartbroken that he couldn't protect her. But then there are moments when I'm like, stop leading with your heart, because you are putting everybody in a dangerous situation. And there were a couple moments where I was like, I did not know if he was going to make it out because of the decisions that he made. And I'm like, sir. And even Gucci at some point is just like, Animal, you can't, let's just leave well enough alone. But he just can't. He's letting his emotions guide him so much some points that you're just kind of like, stop doing that. Like, just stop and think, cool down and think. But for him, there is no cooling down and thinking. And I think also there's this aspect of like Quan not allowing Animal to kill without it impacting his conscience. So while a lot of what Animal does is extremely violent and gory, he is psychologically impacted by that. And I didn't even think about how important that was going to be to me as a reader, to know that this man is not killing and then going to sleep at night. This man is killing and having to stay up because he's afraid of his dreams. Like, there was one passage where he basically says he had stayed up so long, or he intentionally would stay up to the point that his body would just force itself to shut down. That way he could sleep with no dreams. That's how much it was impacting him to continue to commit the violence that he was committing. But I think in leading with his emotions, he just couldn't stop himself because he needed vengeance. That's why I said this is like, if you like revenge stories, like, this is, I mean, nothing but revenge. Now, originally I was going to give this book 3.5 stars. I really was. I was like, 3.5 stars. It's good, solid read. Boy, I got to that last chapter. I said, oh no. I had to give it 4 stars. 2, I immediately went and got the second book. That's how wild the ending to the story was. I could not have seen that coming from a million miles away. It was absolutely bonkers. And so excited to be stepping into. I'm currently reading the second book and I'm enjoying it. Now, my issues that I take with this. So what I was saying earlier is that Animal technically appears in one of Kwan's earlier series called Hood Rats. And what I've seen reviewers say before, like, I finished this one out, I went to check something out because it was just kind of throwing me off. And I had found out that you didn't necessarily have to read Hood Rats in order to read this one, because Kwan attempts to introduce new readers to this world without them having to have read that other series. I just don't like the way that Kwan does it. So he introduces so many different characters and so many different perspectives, and I think he does that because he wants to give you insight to these people that maybe other readers have already met before and you haven't. And so he's trying to give you like this three-dimensional perspective of every single character. But the issue that I take with that is that it becomes a bit much at times because it's hard to keep up with everyone. And so you're trying to remember, like, okay, this person is connected to this person because they did this and this, and these people, you know, are in one group together, and these people belong to this group, and these two groups don't get along. And so it becomes this like festering pool of just like names and affiliations that can get it's so difficult to keep it with it. Because I remember texting Monet and I was like, yo, it's a lot of characters like in this book. Like, you feel like there's a lot of different perspectives that we're getting. I can't even begin to tell you how many perspectives we really do get from this book, but it's a lot. And it was too much. It was just way too much. With all that said though, this was an interesting step into a new series for me. Did I need to start another series? Absolutely not. But am I planning on attempting to finish the series before the year ends? Absolutely. Absolutely. I just, this was a shocking, if I had to pick like one of the most shocking surprises in terms of like books that I pick up this year, Animal is going to be on there. Not because I automatically thought that I wasn't going to like it, but with as much gore as is present in this book, I was like, I got through it. I got through it, like, and I enjoyed it. So the next thing that I ended up reading was another middle grade, which also was in some ways violent, but not on the level of Animal. And that was Deadlands, or The Deadlands Hunted, and this is by Sky Milky Wagner. So I had mentioned this in my April release video. I talked about this one in detail and saying that I was really excited for it because it's a mashup of Wings of Fire, which I do like, by Tutti Sutherland, and Jurassic Park. If you didn't know, Wings of Fire is a middle grade fantasy series that focuses on these dragon clans that are at war with each other, and they're supposed to be these dragonettes that fulfill this prophecy that's supposed to save everyone. I'm about 4 books into that series, and so I enjoy it. And with that series, it progressively gets better with each book that you read. And so in my head, I'm thinking like, okay, you know, we're talking Wings of Fire meets Jurassic Park. I am your ultimate fan here because I was that kid that was obsessed with dinosaurs. I mean, disgustingly obsessed. I loved everything dinosaur related, and I watched Jurassic Park too many times at a young age when I probably shouldn't even have been watching the daggone movie. And so when this was pitched that way, I was like, wow, yes, my childhood fantasy fulfilled. When I started reading it, I realized that one of the other kind of pieces from my childhood that they should have included in this is that if you like The Land Before Time, you will also like this, because The Land Before Time has that like ragtag group of dinosaurs trying to work together and survive. It's kind of that same element in this one, where we have a ragtag group of dinosaurs that are trying their hardest to survive. So basically the story is about these dinosaurs. For some reason or another, they've all been exiled to the Deadlands for whatever reasons, and I'm not going to even really say what the reasons are because it kind of is somewhat of a spoiler. But the dinosaurs are, and forgive me for butchering these names, they're or an Oroctodromeus, a Triceratops, a Sauropod, an Ankylosaurus, and an Anurognathed. I believe that's how you say that. So it's 5 of them. Like I said, they've been exiled from their respective communities to pretty much be in the Deadlands, except for the, of course, Anurognathed. It is not technically exiled, kind of, sort of. Don't want to spoil that. But they are not just only like marked for death, essentially. They're coming from warring kingdoms. So you have to think that you are in this group of dinosaurs where you are not even supposed to get along to begin with. Though some of them within this group are neutral, but eventually when they all get on the same page, they realize that their kingdom's warring has been an orchestrated issue that has a really sick and nasty like origin story. It's twisted why they're actually fighting each other, which of course I can't really spoil. I think that some of the strengths about this book is, like I said, like if you're a dinosaur junkie like me, you're gonna eat this up. The whole premise of it is interesting. I think it almost mimics the Wings of Fire series in the sense that this is a solid start to the series, but I think that it will progressively get better. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It's not a bad, because people like to think that a 3 or 3.5 is a bad rating. I don't know why. 3 or 3.5 for me means that it is a solid book. It was good. It wasn't excellent and it wasn't the best of the best, but it's a solid, good book. And so I did give this one 3.5 stars. I think that the world itself is pretty interesting. So, you know, of course, in science, we're taught that a meteor came to Earth and pretty much wiped out all the dinosaurs. Well, the author reimagines the meteor coming to Earth, and instead of destroying all the dinosaurs, it makes them sentient. So they're able to actually talk and communicate with each other. They're able to strategize. They're able to create. They're able to destroy each other. Like, I mean, they're at war with each other. So I thought that that origin story there was really, really unique. I also like that she spent so much time detailing each of the main characters. We get to spend a significant part of time with them, meaning that you get this full, well-rounded 360-degree perspective of each one of these dinosaurs and their hopes and their dreams and their failures and, you know, their fears, all of it wrapped into one. And so you get to know them very, very well. There's one that I think we should have got to know a little bit better, but I think that there's a possibility that we will get to know them more in the future. So like Wings of Fire, this one definitely is a little bit more on the darker side of middle grade fantasy. So I definitely would rec this ages 10 and up. There's a little bit of violence in this, not compared to what I read in Animal, but there is violence in this in terms of them having to deal with carnivores and then certain elements in the Deadlands that they weren't necessarily anticipating. Now, what didn't work for me and what I had took issue with is like Wings of Fire, which is why I said this author must have studied, in my mind I was saying this author must have studied Wings of Fire or must be a huge fan of Wings of Fire, because like Wings of Fire, this series is going to start off a little bit on the complicated end. But what I'm hoping is like Wings of Fire, as you get more immersed in the series and the stories, you are not as confused as you are in that first book, because it's a new fantasy world and your mind has to become adapted, especially because you're talking about not a fantasy world where we're dealing with humans and a magic system, but a fantasy world where we could be dealing with a magic system and animals. And so you're learning about these different types of animals, which in some ways can be difficult to process. One thing that I will recommend is if you do pick this book up, do not listen to it on audio. If you can help yourself, don't listen to it on audio. And the reason why I don't recommend listening to it on audio is that the author uses some new names for these dinosaurs. Not saying that she doesn't ever refer to them by their scientific names, but there's some fantasy-esque type names that she uses that aligns with their role in this whole, this crustacea is actually what they call it. And it was confusing. it was confusing at first, and it was confusing enough that I actually Literally, I'm looking at it. I have a Word document where I had to write the scientific name of the dinosaur, as well as the fantasy-esque name that was given to them, and then their role within the whole world of Crustacea, like whether they were neutral or whether they were part of the world, part of the war going on between the two kingdoms, and like what their skill set was. I think if I had a physical book, because I got this as an advanced listening copy, I feel like if I got this as a physical book, it wouldn't have been as difficult, but I didn't. And so this is one of those series where I'm like, I wouldn't know if I would recommend listening to this on audio. It's kind of the same way I feel about Wings of Fire, where like, to get started with that series, I don't know if I would recommend listening to it on audio, because I feel like it's very, very easy to miss things and to get confused on what kingdom is what kingdom, and what, you know, this kingdom is this and this kingdom is that. It's literally the same thing with this one as well. I think that too, the pacing was a little off towards the middle, kind of slowed down for me. I didn't even listen to this one quickly. I listened to this one at 1.25. And so I know that the pacing was off, because even at that speed where I was able to effectively process the information about the fantasy sides of the world, I was like, yeah, this is kind of becoming a little bit of a slog. And it's interesting because it wouldn't be as bad as soon as this high stakes moment came up, but when there wasn't a lot of high stakes, it was a little bit slower when it came to the middle portion of that book. Like I said, it's a pretty solid start. 3.5 stars from me, and the second book is supposed to drop this fall, so I definitely will be picking it up. After that, I ended up picking up the second book in the Bad Guys series by Aaron Blabey. Now, what's interesting about this is I'm pretty sure this was my second time reading this book. I thought I hadn't read it because I didn't mark it as read on Goodreads, which is why I try so hard to track my reading to know if I've read books before. And I'm pretty sure I read this one last year and just didn't get around to doing a review, marking it as currently reading, which is like 20 or 30 books that I haven't done again this year, which is fine. I'm going to figure that out. But this is the second book in the series, Bad Guys and Mission Unpluckable. Hilarious. If you like children's chapter books that have humor, these are good read-alouds for kids. They're just funny, y'all. They're funny. I'm a whole grown adult, and I find these to be hilarious. This specific one follows them as they go to a chicken farm to release hundreds of chickens. But the funniest part was that we have this new character that's introduced, and it's a spider, right? And so when you originally meet all the characters in the series, it's a wolf, a shark, a piranha, and a snake. Tell me why the shark, which looks like a great white shark, is so scared of the spider. Like, cannot, like, literally collapses and falls apart anytime the spider is around. It is hilarious. I found myself laughing out loud multiple times reading this one. I can't wait. I literally have the third one upstairs sitting by my bed. So I'm excited to pick that one up. Gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. All right, the last one that I'm going to talk about today was almost a perfect read for me, and it's Chloe and the Kaishao Boys. This was 4.5 stars, y'all. It was almost perfect. Almost perfect. Almost perfect. It was so good. I enjoyed reading this one. I laughed. My heartstrings were pulled multiple times. Anyway, so Chloe and the Kaishao Boys originally caught me because of the cover. I think the cover is absolutely gorgeous. And then I read the description. I was like, oh yeah. I said, this is potentially going to be a good one. I just need to go ahead and pick it up. So I did. And so the book follows Chloe, who originally was waitlisted to go to USC. She eventually does get her acceptance letter. At the time that you start the book, you find out that she gets her acceptance letter. And she is supposed to have her debut before she goes to California. And while the planning is going on for it, when she turns 18, so while the planning is going on for it, like all of a sudden her father starts setting her up on these Kaishaos. And basically they're like, it's like a dating setup, getting matched with people. And her dad is doing it. She's like, why is he so interested in my love life? This is weird. And so as a parent, when I found out why her dad was doing it, I was like, I get that. I'm not there yet, but I get that as a parent. I get where he was coming from. It's a beautiful book about just family and first time love and just finding yourself and believing yourself and putting yourself first. It's very heartwarming and charming. And there were so many things that worked about this book that I absolutely adored. So Chloe is a Chinese Filipina girl, and I did not know much about the intersecting identities of being Chinese and Filipino. And I must say that I learned a heck of a lot by reading this one, and we really get to see those intersecting identities play out through a good bit of the characters outside of Chloe. So while this is categorized as a romantic comedy, I will say that the familial relationships are actually what's centered in this book. And the romantic aspects of the relationship dynamics that Chloe has with guys is secondary to the narrative. And I appreciated that, because I'm always wondering, like, does every YA book have that romance? And in this one, it was like, I knew I was walking into a rom-com, don't get me wrong, but to see the emphasis on family and family dynamics was really, really nice. And I think that the Kaishaos were just fun to watch. There were 3 specific characters that we get to meet. I won't tell you anything about them or how their, you know, their relationship with Chloe prior to being set up, because what I will say is that she knows all 3 of them. These are not like random strange blind dates. She knows all 3 of the guys, and their interconnectedness is very much so interesting and ends up covering a plethora of different topics and identities, and I really, really appreciated that. I loved like how funny they were. There were so many moments that were just hilarious. Like, Chloe's dad is obsessed with Instagram, and I think that it is the funniest thing. Like, the hashtags that he uses on his pictures are absolutely hilarious. But I also like that there was this deep exploration of Chloe's relationship with her parents, because you quickly find out in the beginning that she's in the Philippines with her dad and her mother is in the US. And so she often thinks about how her decision to go to USC is going to impact the relationship that she has with her mother, as well as the relationship that she has with her father, and what that means, you know, leaving home. Here's the thing that I did not like. And it's such a me thing, but it drove me up the wall, which is why I was like, I can't in good faith give this 5 stars, because it just drove me wild. So Chloe has a wonderful best friend by the name of Sia, and Sia is great. Sia does play a major role in Chloe's life and in pieces and parts of this narrative. Chloe and Sia are obsessed with Beyonce, which is fine. I'm not part of the Beehive. I enjoy Beyonce's music, but I'm not like a diehard fan at all. Like, I don't have to, you know, the concerts and all that stuff, and it's just not me. I'm not a diehard fan. It's not about Beyonce. That's not the issue that I took. I am not a huge fan of pop culture references. If there are some pop culture references, I'm okay with it, because it is what it is. But when a book becomes oversaturated with pop culture references, for me, for some reason, it makes me feel like it prematurely dates the book. And that the book in, you know, 5-10 years time is not going to hold up, depending upon the pop culture references that are being made. We see that with a lot of books now, both YA and middle grade, that have used pop culture references, and those references have done really horrible things, and now it's relatively awkward reading that book. And so that's why, for me, it's kind of like, be careful what or who you put on a pedestal in your books, because you never know what could come in the future that could inevitably either date your book or give future readers an awkward experience. So this was just Beyonce'd up, and that's fine, whatever. But I just was like, this is just an element that's just not working for me. So that's why it's 4.5 stars. It could be really, really petty of me, y'all, but at the end of the day, I know me and how I feel about stuff like that. So that's why. I'm currently reading quite a lot of things. At the time that this is going up, we are in the midst of 30 and 30, which you won't see any of that material covered here. A lot of that's going to be covered on my other channel. So I'm just going to cover the books that I'm currently reading right now. I started a new middle grade fantasy, I think before March ended, and that was Arashima Steals the Sword of the Wind, which is based off of, I believe, Japanese mythology. It's really good so far. I'm just kind of slowly taking my time with that one. I think I'm only an hour in with that one. I am currently reading Children of the Quicksands, but this is one I'm actually going to start over because I'm listening to it slowly, but I think that there's some pieces and parts that I'm missing, and so I'm going to start that one from scratch because the only thing that I'm getting from it now is that it focuses on a young girl who basically is sent to live with her grandmother by her mother, and she has no idea why she was sent there. And her mother tried to raise her as, I can't believe it's a Christian or Catholic, but clearly there are some magical elements that her grandmother practices that she's not familiar with, that she's beginning to get a little taste of. But like I said, I think I'm going to start that one over. It's not a long book, it's not a long audio book, but for the sake of understanding and retention, especially when it comes to fantasy, I'm going to start that over. I am reading The Omen, which is the second book in the Animal series by Kwan. I already talked about that a little bit. I am still reading some things from the Trans Rights Readathon that I didn't finish. I had started Love After the End, an anthology of two-spirit and an indigiqueer speculative fiction. I still plan to finish that one. I also started When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. This is the second book in the Singing Hill cycle, which I loved the first one. So once again, not a long one, but I'm taking my time working through that one. I am currently also reading Felice and the Wailing Woman. This is a art copy that I am attempting to read and review before it comes out on the 18th. And then I am also still, because I don't want to not continue, I'm still also currently reading the second book in the Fablehaven series. I'm about 100 pages into this, which is not bad considering that the book itself is 434, but it's a fast middle grade read. But I don't want y'all to think that I stopped reading the Fablehaven series. So those are the books that I'm reading. I'm reading a whole bunch of graphic novels as always, and then a bunch of manga because it's 30 and 30. But I always like to do this currently reading segment. Hopefully we'll go back to doing this once a week, y'all. I need to go back to doing this once a week, unless it's a situation where I just can't do it. But as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support this channel via Patreon, all the links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.